A first warning here, I'm going to change the dynamics a little from everything that we've been hearing so far. The previous panel, we debated a lot of things that really got me excited here. I was agreeing with every single statement of the four colleagues, because I'm going to talk about first about this side of the story as a customer of suppliers that are peers of our illustrious partners. And I'm also going to address a very important topic in our industry. As you said, I'm in a little more than 10 years journey, considering myself really a fraud prevention evangelist. I am the one that may be called boring by those who are not familiar with the team, because I'm really passionate for what I do. And since day one, I've realized that I'm a completely data-driven person. So this is maybe my first and more important driver. But since day one, I've always realized that we always needed to consider the human layer of the strategy. It's all about people. We have a lot, I'm gonna use some examples here. We have a lot to discuss when it comes to technology, to disruptive technology, to innovation, to new fraud trends. But in the end of the day, we always need to rely on a very consistent human layer, as I like to call. So let's go to the presentation here. The coronavirus pandemic, among so many other impacts, has thrown the entire world on a journey with no return to the digital world. Companies of the most different sizes and markets that already suffered to some degree due to their absence in this environment had to accelerate their digitization at the risk of succumbing in a few months. In Brazil, we had a lot of cases of medium and small-sized companies that simply were obliterated at the beginning of the pandemic, exactly because they weren't ready to go digital with the speed necessary. Consumers with few or no digital consumption habits were also suddenly thrust into this inevitable reality. And for all of us here, from a risk point of view, the mere sum of these two factors has been a full plate for fraudsters who, unlike our newbies, are not only fully integrated into the digital world, but also dedicate many hours of their day mapping every vulnerability and opportunity for financial gain through fraud. A recent survey on digital security by TransUnion showed that the number of digital frauds involving financial services increased by 457% in the first official 12 months of the pandemic, between April 2020 and April 2021. Here in Brazil, this represented more than $500 million in fraud prevented alone. At the same time, the concern of most companies grew. According to the Global Fraud Report 2021 survey carried out by CyberSource, the investments made by merchants of all sizes in anti-fraud tools in the last 2 years had an average increase of 5 times. Here in Latin America, the investments were 12 times higher than usual. It's natural that with this increasing demand, the number and diversity of suppliers and tools is also increasing. From well-known and minimally consolidated solutions, such as facial biometrics, tokenization, multi-factor authentication, to relative novelties, such as voice biometrics and behavioral biometrics, all of them in some degree, we had presentations here today. The range of possibilities is increasing and is becoming every time more and more complex. The huge diversity of solutions added to the limitation of resources to invest in the fraud prevention strategy forces any company to seek in-depth knowledge of the potential risks involved in its business in order to build and orchestrate a defense strategy that is both adequate to its needs and financially viable. This introduction was just planned to not look like a fish out of the water in this forum, because, as I said, I'm really data driven, but I always go for the other side of the story here, where in the vast majority of fraud prevention forums like this one, it's natural to focus 100% of the discussion on technologies and solutions, fraud trends, or both, as we did here a lot today. It's frighteningly easy to forget the most critical yet often overlooked component of the equation, the human layer. People in all the hierarchical levels. In the end of the day, it's all about them. You succeed with them, you fail in spite of them. We all know what happens when you give a great car to a lousy or inept driver, and what a great driver can do with an average car. So I like to make this comparison here, because behind every successful strategy, every outstanding model, every new disruptive tech, we have people working on them. We will always find professionals dedicated to making it happen behind any successful strategy. After all, high levels of performance, assertiveness, and effectiveness will always be directly related to the quality and preparation of the teams responsible for the development, implementation, calibration, and maintenance of the strategic plan. I like to give this little, not so little intro here, exactly to change a little the dynamics, because so far we've been hearing most tech companies that offer these services in order to help players for the most various markets. I started working as an acquirer, and now I work as an issuer. But I've always sought to go deep into the ecosystem, so I consider myself really familiar to all the sides of the ecosystem of payment means, especially. So when we talk about all you have to offer, it's cool to know that when we choose how when we have to choose how to invest our limited resources on building a fraud prevention strategy, a fraud prevention framework, it's really important to have at some point inside the company capable persons to orchestrate this, to know how to address the proper problems, the reality that each player faces, who knows how to choose between, as I said, all this diversity of service providers and tools, and especially to know how to address the proper problems with the proper solutions. When we talk about building and structuring a fraud prevention strategy, I like to consider two very distinct pillars around which this strategy will be built. Fraud management, as I'm calling it here, which is the core of the area, responsible, among other things, for defining policies and procedures, mapping risks, prospecting suppliers and solutions, conducting all the projects related to the area, and the entire and endless cycle of continuous improvement inherent to the area, in addition to some more operational aspects and less strategic that are always present to a greater or lesser extent in any structure. In what I'm simply calling data pillar here, which obviously is responsible for feeding the area with insights that will constantly guide the strategy. This includes especially data science and analytics, but also big data whenever applicable. We must invest enough time on the analysis of each one of these pillars so we can exhaustively map the current scenario as is and the company's needs in each of them, converting these needs into competencies that will make the to be achievable. Talking to market peers and HR professionals from different segments and all kinds of markets you may think of, I see many companies having difficulties in assembling this so-called human layer of their fraud prevention strategies, because on my point of view, my humble point of view, they try to encapsulate very, very different skills and competencies in a single professional profile. When I evaluate the current generation, and I don't exclude myself from it, I clearly realize that talents that have you can put at least 7 in both areas that I mentioned, fraud management and data science or analytics or big data, are still very rare. We had here a lot of examples of outstanding professionals, and none of them is new on the market. Each and every one of these brilliant professionals that we had the opportunity to hear today have reasonably consolidated careers and have already walked many steps to reach this solid understanding of both fraud prevention and the data aspects that come along. But at the same time, that it's pretty clear to me that the current generation is still bridging this gap. I think that it's not so clear to most of the recruiters and contractors. And I realized that the dynamics adopted in the search for these professionals has run into a considerable problem. I like to call it the unicorn hunters. Where do they live? What do they eat? Do they exist? And yes, we had a lot of examples, but still are rare as an unicorn. And especially in case you're trying to hire one and you find this brilliant professional with superb knowledge of both fraud prevention, fraud management, and data skills, how much are you willing to spend with them just in case you find one? I'm not calling a unicorn this beautiful creature here, of course. We call unicorn this rare combination and the same professional of skills and competencies in different areas, sometimes almost antagonical, but with a high degree of proficiency on both these skills, both these areas. In fact, this professional looks much more like this guy, if you may think of. And as I said, it's a rare combination. When you find someone who masters these two disciplines, let's call, you generally are talking about a very senior professional, sometimes already on an executive level. If you apply this concept of mastering two abilities so hard to master and apply this concept specifically to the fraud prevention scenario, I see a real dilemma here. First, I'd like to invite you to look at the difference between the average annual compensation of a fraud prevention analyst and a data scientist. This is from Glassdoor source and consider the USA market. And we may see that when we take the average Joe of the fraud prevention analysts, considering that this guy is already on an intermediate position, and we compare to the same level on a data scientist career, it's obviously not a fair competition, we may say. This is, if you have, what are the chances of finding on the beginning of the career an enlightened soul who has really managed to dig deep into both subjects instead of specializing more and more in the one that is clearly more financially attractive? I don't know about you, but if I were at the beginning of my career facing crossroads on deciding my professional future and came across these numbers, they probably will throw me far away from fraud prevention. Another interesting thing to compare is the individual journey of each one of these two careers. And I will focus more on the data science career here, representing the data pillar that I mentioned previously. When we talk about the fraud prevention career, and here I'm just putting the tip of the iceberg, but the fraud prevention career, as all of us here know, is extremely accessible. Admission has absolutely no academic prerequisites, and the learning curve is quite flexible and adaptable to each person's rhythm. However, the development of this career is directly linked to exposure, experience, and practice. The skills needed, and I recall many of the things that we heard today, the skills needed to understand the most diverse types of fraud, to identify the root cause of each fraud, to be able to define the right solutions for the right problems, to ensure that your fraud prevention framework comprehends and covers the entire ecosystem of your company, and many other challenges are built over years and years of practice and study. In addition, as also was mentioned here, to a lot of information exchange with market peers. And I even open a parenthesis here. I invite you, because here in Brazil, we still struggle to achieve this incredible level of contribution between the players. It's still a tough team to overcome here in the Brazilian market. It's still sometimes fraud prevention is treated like a competition, an absurd competition, but still is treated like this here. Parenthesis closed. So if you want to become a top level fraud prevention professional, it's going to take you a lot of dedication. And in parallel, when we look at the development of a career in data science, especially here, specifically here, you have a very well-defined and dense technical learning path. Practice naturally represents a fundamental part of development, but becoming a top-notch data professional will also require a lot of dedication. Remember the dilemma I mentioned? Current companies looking for professionals, most of the times young professionals with relevant experience in fraud prevention and outstanding data science skills. That's the question. That's the question. You're basically looking for a unicorn, and that's the only possible answer you have right now, because it's almost as if you were looking for a doctor, experienced doctor that also happens to be to have a master's on IT. So things really quite difficult to imagine, but when we go across and we have these conversations that I love to have with HR professionals and recruiters and other peers from market that are trying to hire people to their teams, it's really clear to me that we have professionals that are really lucid about this and know that it will be really difficult to find all these skills on a single professional, and others that don't, that think that it's completely natural to ask for someone to have 7 or more years of relevant experience in fraud prevention, plus superb knowledge of Python, for example, or any other programming language, data science oriented, and they simply don't understand why they cannot fill the positions. They are positions that born and die open without a handful of candidates that you can even consider. So this is what I say. If you don't get real, and by any chance you find someone with this so-called qualities, this person most likely will end up becoming one of these guys here, and not the unicorn that you thought you were hiding. Okay. But despite having already mentioned that I consider the absolute majority of the professional of the current generation, my generation or something like that, I consider the most of this generation incapable of performing consistently and simultaneously at a high level in areas as diverse as fraud prevention and data, especially data science. I see that a significant part of these professionals already realize the demand and is qualifying fast, and I mean really fast. I truly believe that in a very few years, a couple of years, we will have the first batch maybe of fraud prevention teams that looks less like this guy here and maybe more like this one, because we'll have the best of two worlds. We have maybe data scientist students that happen to cross path with fraud prevention, and then can build a beautiful career with the best of this two so interligated skills. Until that day arrives, the mapping that I mentioned earlier, when you have to check all the scenario you have on fraud management and on data and transform it into needs, so you can go and decide what will be your strategy on the human layer, the assemblage of the human layer on your strategy. This mapping will provide inputs for a rational decision about the best model to be followed with regard to the assembly of your human layer. Your company can choose to hire and train its own multidisciplinary team. As I said, don't go for unicorns. It won't work unless you are willing to pay a lot of money, and most likely you hire superb data scientists with no relevant experience in fraud prevention, or the opposite. So go for multidisciplinary teams, hire a decent data scientists, hire experienced fraud prevention professionals, and make these teams talk, make this persons talk and interact and complement each other, because this model is really nice, because you can maintain full control and autonomy in addition to a high capacity of customizing all your anti-fraud systems and tools. But you can also go the other way, the opposite path, and opt for outsourcing, even if you outsource to another area inside your company. Here at my current position at Calcard, we have, for example, the whole data science and modeling area consolidates the demand of all the company. So marketing, fraud prevention, FP&A, you name it. We need to focus on having the best technicians in our teams, and we know that we will use this centralized structure to attend our needs. So we don't need to go out and hunt for unicorns, for example, here in our case. So even if you outsource internally, we also have the original option of literally outsourcing. We have many companies coming abroad with an approach of fraud prevention as a service. I still don't know anyone that really covers the process end to end, but for example, here in Brazil, we have a lot of service providers who offers you an onboarding fraud prevention as a service. So this player covers all your onboarding strategy, and it's really, it lets you free to work on the management, on the strategical decisions and the orchestration of these suppliers and all the others who compose your fraud prevention framework. And in the end of the day, you can always go for the hybrid format that I think it's the one that works best, because it gets the best of each model, thinking about financial and technological aspects such as scalability, availability, that sometimes are really expensive for a company that it's not, doesn't have IT as its core, doesn't have a huge structure of processing and all the rest. And you also reduce your administrative costs with activities that are not core to the business, and you outsource what you feel like you have to outsource, and you don't want to have, for example, a 24/7 monitoring with your own team. So you outsource this part of the strategy to a partner that will do this for you. And regardless of the choices here, all of them have pros and cons. So I end this presentation using the maximum fraud prevention jargon that is more than valid here. There is no such thing as a silver bullet. There is not, simply not. There's not the perfect service provider that will solve all of my problems. There's not the perfect professional that will alone be a powerhouse and conduct and give all the results. And there's no tactic, there's no strategy that is completely applicable to and replicable to any situation. You always have to think, understand the problem, use some Ishikawa's model to look for root cause of your problems, and then apply the correct remedy. So in the end of the day, orchestration and customization wins 10 out of 10.